Record like your knee for a second here, maybe. Yeah, it doesn't say. Oh well. Okay, if it quits for some reason, you hear it beep, let me know. Is that good? Is that on my face?
Yeah, you can see your face.
Okay, so let's continue. Let's talk about culture shock, counterculture, culture lag, all right? You could do subculture also, right? So culture shock is like if we moved to, I'll use Saudi Arabia again, like there'd be some culture shock for all of us, right? Even if we moved to, there'd be a little bit even if we moved to like my hometown, Beach, right? So I gave examples in class about how I graduated with 42 people. If you handed me a piece of paper and said, write down the name of everybody you graduated with, I could do it right now. I could drive around town and tell you where like everybody lived. So that's a little weird to a lot of you, right? So that's a little bit of an example of culture shock. Counterculture is a movement within a culture that challenges the culture as a whole, right? And then cultural lag is the tendency for elements of culture to change at different rates. So we might have norms that say don't do something, but we don't have laws yet that apply to those things. And a classic example of that could be like when the internet or cell phones first came out. You know, they didn't have laws about digitally trying to exploit minors, for example. But then those laws, you know, everybody knew that it wasn't cool for some like 55-year-old dude to try to like hook up with a 14-year-old girl and to use the internet to do that, right? So everybody knew that like the moment AOL Messenger started, like people knew that wasn't okay, but they didn't have laws against it, right? So it took them a little while to pass those laws. That's an example of cultural lag. Did anybody have any questions on those concepts?
What's the difference between counterculture and
Subculture doesn't necessarily challenge the norms of a culture. It could just be a different expression. So for example, let's use like hockey subculture, right? So is the term flow, is that what the guys use for their hair? Yeah. And it's like a little weird, but does it really challenge the like prevailing norms of society? No, not really. Okay. Or like, I know there's a wrestling team in the state of North Dakota, Hettinger, that always dyes their hair bleach blonde right before state. So yeah, it's a little, a swim team does that. So it challenges, or it's a subculture. It's like their thing, but it's not really challenging the norms of society. Does that make sense? So that'd be an example of subculture, not counterculture. Okay. Okay. How about high culture and pop culture?
high culture is fancy like caviar and stuff, and pop culture is kind of like popular.
Yeah. So high culture is what's common in the elite in society, whereas pop culture is what's common for everybody. Can you look at the image and just make sure, Joey? Look at the image. You can't see the test, can you?
No.
Okay, good. One year I did the review session and it was like, you could see like the top question on the test on every page I went through. So, I
can only see like the bottom of your chin and up.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, so do you understand the difference between those then? Make sense? High and pop culture? Okay, do you remember we talked about Robin Williams' top 10 cultural values in the United States?
Yeah.
So like innovation, efficiency, group superiority, there are some that are perceived as bad, right? Do common cultural values always align, I guess is the question. No, right? So we have cultural values that say, you know, it's important to be honest and work hard. But then we also have cultural values that say, like win at all costs or something, right? Like winning is super important. So there's cultural values that sometimes conflict with each other. Talked about that. Okay. What is multiculturalism. What's multiculturalism? Yeah. So it's a view often tied to education that basically says that diversity and equality of all cultures is a good thing. Is good, yeah. Multiculturalism basically says, again, it's often educational. It says the more cultures we can get in a society, the better. By definition, the more diverse the cultures you have, the better. That's the assumption with multiculturalism. Okay, you remember how we talked about invention, discovery, and innovation? Those are sources of cultural change, right? So what is it when, let's say some guy moves from India to Alexander, North Dakota. It's a small town south of Williston, right? And for whatever reason, they're totally disconnected, and all of a sudden that guy brings Indian food and cooking styles with him, opens an Indian restaurant, and takes off. Is that invention, discovery, or diffusion? Diffusion, because diffusion is where elements that already exist in a different culture move into a new one, okay? What's a discovery then? Like when they discovered oil in a place, right? So let's say, pick a country, there's like, I don't know what country we would use, but let's just say it's like New Zealand. I don't know if they have a lot of oil or not off the top of my head, but let's just say that they do. All of a sudden we discover like a little place in New Zealand, and if we dig deep enough, it's like the world's biggest supply of oil, like hands down more than anywhere else. That's discovery, right? Is that going to change the culture of New Zealand a lot? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then invention is like where, if in a society we come up with like the internet, right, or self-driving cars or whatever. So those are all sources of cultural change. What is it where you think that your own culture is like the best, and you judge all other cultures by that culture standard? That's ethnocentrism. What is the flip side? What is the one that says you should judge each culture by its own standards? Cultural relativism. Okay, let's shift to chapter 3 now. Chapter 3 is on socialization. Socialization is like the lifelong process where people learn the norms of society and develop their full potential. So a common misconception with socialization is that it's like growing up. It's not just growing up, right? So you continue to learn and grow throughout your lifespan. Now, different theorists had ideas about socialization. Some of those people include Freud, Jean Piaget, Carol Gilligan, Lawrence Kohlberg, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So let's talk about some of their ideas. Freud talked a lot about the unconscious, subconscious mind. He also had the 3 elements of personality. What are those 3 elements? Id, ego, and superego. Which one is the driving force in the personality, according to Freud? The id. So the id is like the devil on the shoulder in the analogy. What is the thing that functions as your conscience, like the angel, the thing that tries to balance the id? The superego. And then your conscious efforts to balance those two is the ego. Okay, what are Piaget's 4 stages of cognitive development? Sensory motor is the first one. What's the second one? Pre-operational, third one? Concrete, operational. So the way I remember that's the third one is C is the third letter of the alphabet, right? And then the last one is formal operational. And the way I remember that is F is the first letter, and what's the last grade that anybody wants to get? An F, right? Okay.
What was the first and second one again?
It's just put 4 stages.
Sure.
But yeah, it's sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete,
Okay.
formal. Yeah. Okay, so in the sensory motor, you just respond to stimulus in your environment. In the pre-operational, that's where you first start to use symbols. So like my son isn't fully, the youngest one, Caleb, is like 13 months old. He's transitioning from the sensory motor into the pre-operational, right? So he started to figure out how to say hello, but it's like this. We're like, hey baby, and he like puts his hand up and goes like this, right? So he doesn't fully grasp that concept, like that it means hello or whatever. He's starting to use symbols, right? Starting to blabber a little bit, like it sounds like he says this a lot. Like we'll tell him, do you want this? And then he'll point out stuff and this, and kind of shake because he gets excited, right? Okay, in the third stage, concrete operational, that's where you first see causation. So third stage, causation, concrete. And then formal operational is where you think abstractly and critically. So abstract concepts in math are hard to understand, and more people get Fs in those disciplines, right? And F is the last grade you'd like to get, it's the last stage. Okay, Kohlberg talked about moral development, right? Pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional are Kohlberg's 3 levels. In the pre-conventional level, what's good? What feels good? In the conventional level, what's good? Whatever the rules say. And in the post-conventional level, abstract moral principles are what matter, right? Okay, what were the 4 main agents of socialization the text talked about? Mass media, school. What are the social institutions that help socialize people, basically, is what that's asking. Peers is the other one, and then the main one, family, right? Okay, so when you're interacting with your peers, sometimes you role play. Like Piaget talked a lot about how play helps people to learn. So I use the example of my BFF that lived right next door to me growing up. Her name was Danya. We used to play house a lot, and she was older, so she's like, you're the dad and I'm the mom, and she kind of ran the show. That's an example of a specific type of socialization. What is that called? Where you role play and it helps you to, like, you're not in a position yet, but by role playing it helps you to grow into that position. What type of socialization is that? It's called blank socialization. That's anticipatory socialization. So besides me and Danya playing house, like if you go to football games in a lot of towns, there's like 10 to 12-year-old boys that play football, like kind of in the end zone off to the side. That's an example of anticipatory socialization, right? Okay, what is the group in society that seeks to achieve re-socialization? Where they break down somebody's identity and try to give them a new one. What parts of society try to do that? Prisons, which are an example of what? Total institutions, yeah. So prisons, rehab, those try to carry out re-socialization. Okay, Gilligan took Kohlberg's research and what did she apply it to? Gilligan applied it to gender. So what's the difference between how boys and girls typically reason?
Men go by rules.
Men focus on rules, girls focus on feelings. Yep. Okay. When it comes to agents of socialization, which one's the most important in assuring that children grow up well? Family. Yep. So if you have if you're in a crappy school, but you have an amazing family, it's way better than the other way around, right? Or if you have crappy friends, but you have an amazing family, it's better than the other way around, okay? Okay, what's the let's switch to chapter 4. What's the difference between statuses and roles?
Rules like behavior.
Role is the expected behavior. Status is?
Title and role.
Status is the social position you hold. Yep. So right now, for me, teacher, father, husband, college graduate, what are those? Those are statuses. Collectively, what are they called? Status set. What is the most important status to me personally? Master status, right? So it's the status that shapes your life the most. Okay, what if, like right now, I'm here helping you guys, but I also, like my wife's at home dealing with my kids being crazy, right? So what am I experiencing? Role conflict, okay? What if like some of the behavior I have as a teacher is challenging? Like I'm thinking, well, I really need to correct these assignments, but I also want to make sure I research this new thing. That's role strain because it's tied to a single status. So be able to differentiate between those things. What are all the expected behaviors tied to a single status called? Role set. Yep. Okay, so for me, like male, would that be an ascribed or achieved status? Ascribed status. Okay, son. Ascribed. Husband. Teacher. Achieved. Okay, make sense? So achieved is one that you voluntarily take on, whereas ascribed is something that you involuntarily take on. So you don't necessarily have to be born with an ascribed status. So for example, like widow or widower, like your spouse dies, that's going to be an ascribed status, unless like you kill them, you know. But most people don't do that. What? Well, that would be a true example. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know.
Okay, let's talk about humor a little bit. Humor often is built around like SI perspectives because it's all about perception, right? So to use kind of a crude example, if no, I don't want to use that example because people might take it the wrong way. It would work, but I don't want to say it. I'm thinking of like comics that use jokes and there's like perfect examples, but I'm like, I don't want to use it because I'm gonna get in trouble. So to get a joke, to understand a joke, you have to understand the two different realities being presented, right? So if you understand those two different realities, then you can get a joke. So I played a commercial in class where it was like this guy and he was looking at TVs at Sears. And then he's like, I can't decide. And then the guy says, we see that with a lot of people. They struggle over decisions. They can't make up their mind. And then the older guy goes, those people drive me crazy, right? So you guys are probably too young to really get that joke. But when that commercial came out, the guy in that commercial is Brett Favre, who couldn't decide if he should retire or not. And they like made fun of him about that quite a bit. So then putting him in that commercial makes it that much more funny, right? If you understand the reality. If you don't understand the reality, it's not funny to you, okay? Let's talk about two people that researched group dynamics, Solomon Asch and Stanley Milgram. Solomon Asch studied conformity to peer groups, and he used lines, right? If you recall. So in that study, he basically had one person that didn't know it was a study, and had everybody else say that two lines matched that obviously didn't. And he found that people were very likely to agree with the group in order to like not ruffle feathers, right? So the big reason was that they didn't want to challenge the group's cohesion. Milgram studied authority. So what's the difference between conformity and authority? or obedience, I should say more specifically. So you change your behavior if you're conforming in relation to who? Your peers. If you're being obedient, who are you changing your behavior relative to? An authority figure. Yep. So Milgram, if you recall, had to do with the shock study, right? Okay. We talked about bureaucracies, right? Bureaucracies are formal systems that operate by rules in order to encourage predictability and efficiency, right? Predictability and efficiency. There are some problems with that also. So be able to identify some problems of bureaucracies, like the unwillingness to bend to the rules of a bureaucracy is called rigidity, right? So what is the problem in a bureaucracy where the bureaucracy just perpetuates itself? Like it creates more levels and more positions and more rules. That's called bureaucratic what? The term relates to one of Newton's laws. This is how I remember it. So that the tendency for objects in motion to continue in motion, that's a one-word term that starts with an I. What is it? Inertia. Yep. So bureaucratic inertia is the tendency for a bureaucracy to continue moving, right? Okay, in order for there to be a social group, what do you have to have? There's three things you have to have for it to be a group. What's the most obvious one? 2 or more people. What else do you need? Common, like you have to interact with each other, like identify, and interact for a purpose. So those are the 3 things. Okay, what's the difference between a primary and a secondary group?
What was the third thing a social group had? People interact for purpose.
Identify with each other. What's the difference between a primary and secondary group? Primary is closer in essence. It's focused on like identifying together and the feelings, whereas secondary is more about getting stuff done. Okay, what is the tendency to make a poor decision because of pressure to conform with the leader in a group and the illusion that everybody is unified in the decision? What's that called? That's called groupthink. So a historical example of that often is used is the Bay of Pigs invasion. What's the difference between primary and secondary sex characteristics? Yep. Primary is like XY chromosomes, stuff like that, whereas secondary is facial hair, deeper voice, okay? Hairstyle, hair length. Okay, we also talked a lot about like the problems that stem from and the amount of money spent on pornography. So why do conflict theorists criticize pornography mostly? What? Because it treats women as less, right? What are some manifest functions of birth control? It lets people control when they have children. Yep. What is a latent function of birth control then? Well, yeah, I would say like the big one is norms have weakened. So there used to be very strong norms about like not engaging in that activity until marriage. But now because birth control is easier to hide, so then that has unintendedly led to those norms weakening. What is so in the past, like kids that were really hyperactive in class were like rambunctious and didn't listen to teachers, and now they have ADHD. What's that example of? It's an example of medicalization of deviance, yeah. Okay, we talked about the justifications for punishment. What are those? There's 4 of them. Retribution is 1, rehabilitation, deterrence, and societal protection. So be able to identify, like if you get a scenario, it'll say which logic for punishment fits, be able to say if it's deterrence or whatever. Societal protection. Okay, so behavior that challenges norms is called deviance, right? What is it called when, so you're deviant and then you get labeled like a felon. The term felon for you is what? Well, it's a master status and it's a powerfully negative label. What is, that's called a stigma, yeah?
So what was the one with retribution? The other three?
Justifications for punishment. Deterrence, retribution, societal protection, and rehabilitation. Yep. Okay, we talked about strain theory. That talked about societal goals and whether or not you would use the traditional means to get the goals. So let's say the goal is to like make money, have a job, and whatever. And let's say you're somebody that just kind of goes through the motions but doesn't really care about that. What would you be engaging in? Remember the box? Okay, so that would be ritualism, okay? What if you accept the goal and accept the means? That's conformity, okay?
Hold the box.
Yeah, so be able to identify which fits with which, okay? What's the difference between a class system and a caste system?
Class is not just based off of birth, but your merit too.
Yep. Yeah, and a meritocracy is totally based on achieved status. And in a caste system, there's no ability to go up or down. The ability to go up or down is called social mobility. Okay, let me give you some examples of jobs. I want you to tell me if it's white, pink, or blue collar. Lawyer.
White.
White collar. Secretary. Pink collar. Miner.
Light.
Blue collar, like somebody in the mines. Yeah. College football coach.
I would say that's a white.
White collar. Yep. Landscaper. Blue collar. Okay, so you get that? There's a few questions about that. What's the difference between absolute and relative poverty?
Absolute is life forever.
You're gonna die.
Relative, yeah.
Compared to other people.
Yeah.
Yep. So like I'm right now relatively poor. I wouldn't even call myself in the US relatively poor because even our household income it's a little bit less than the median, even with my wife staying at home. So, but let's use, I'm trying to think of another example. Some random person living in an apartment that still has food and has insurance or whatever, but they don't have a car or whatever, relative poverty, okay? Absolute poverty is not that common in the US. Okay, where are most of the poor nations in the world located? Northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere? Southern hemisphere, okay? Which theory basically says that the reason poor nations are poor is because wealthy nations make them dependent on them? Dependency theory, okay? What's the view that says that wealthy corporations control other countries? Neo-colonialism. Yeah, good. Which theory says that the reason poor nations are poor is because they haven't adopted new technology and new norms? Modernization theory. Yeah. What's the expected behavior tied to sex called? Gender roles. Gender roles. Okay, remember we talked about 3 types of feminism? Liberal, radical, and socialist. Which one basically seeks to work within the system and make tweaks to the system as it exists? Liberal. Which one says we got to get rid of capitalism?
No, that's
Socialist.
yeah.
Which one says that we need to totally get rid of gender? That's radical. Okay. What's the difference between prejudice and discrimination?
Prejudice is the idea, discrimination is the action.
Yep, good. What's the difference between de jure and de facto discrimination? De facto means in fact. De jure means by law or rule. Okay? So if, like, in a city, there's no policy that is discriminatory, but people just don't invite minorities because they don't like them, then that's de facto, right? If there's a policy, then it's de jure. Okay, let me give you some examples. I want you to tell me if it's primary, secondary, or tertiary sector of the economy. Housing construction, like you're building houses. Secondary.
Yeah, primary
Yep.
would be like logging.
Timber or logging.
Primary.
Primary, okay. Somebody working in a coffee shop.
Tertiary.
Tertiary, so be able to identify those. What is the religious beliefs that basically take religion very seriously and literally? What's that called? Starts with an F. Fundamentalism. Is that increasing, decreasing, or staying the same?
That is, well, I would say it depends on where you're
It's
at.
increasing. So here's what's happening basically is in religion, you know how everything's polarizing, right, in politics? So the people that are staying religious are getting more fundamentalist, and the people that are like kind of on the fence are dropping out, right? So you're seeing polarization happen, and that's happening with the secularists, the like atheists. Before they used to be like, I don't really believe in God, and now they're like, I don't believe in God, and you shouldn't either. You know, there's a dividing. So that is increasing in that sense. Okay, what's marriage to a bunch of people called? Polygamy. What if it's multiple men? Polyandry, multiple women. Polygyny.
Yeah.
What are behaviors or actions in a religion that have extreme significance called? Well, sacred, yeah, but what the act itself is called a ritual. Yep. What is like normal everyday life called? If not sacred, it's profane. Yep. Okay. What is grouping students according to ability called? Tracking. What is the people leaving a country minus people coming to a country? What type of migration rate? Net migration rate, yeah. What is a visual representation of the men and women by age in a country called? Age sex pyramid, yep. Okay, what is a type of movement that seeks to radically change a small group of people? Redemptive. What if it's wanting to radically change a whole bunch of people? Revolutionary. What if it's trying to change a small group of people only a little bit? Alternative. So look at that box, okay? All right, so let's go over some examples of the identification one and then call it a day. What if it says people break up or people end relationships because they perceive their needs aren't being met? Like social exchange theory, yep. What if, let's say Avery gets flowers from her boyfriend and then she hates them because they remind her of like a dog that she had that died, but then like Isabella loves them. So how do you understand the different construction? That's SI, yep. I'm gonna start my car too, that's a good idea. Okay, what, man is but a product of his thoughts. That's a Gandhi quote. What he thinks he is, he becomes. What he perceives he is, he becomes.
Oh, that's
SI. Yep.
Wouldn't that also be like,
Okay, what?
But
How about people like men should not have an opinion on issues that affect women as a whole because they can't understand the struggles they experience. Conflict. Yeah. All right, I think you guys understand that. Does anybody have any questions for me?
So then, even the matching, will that be all like application questions, or will that be like some definition?
Matching is all definition. There's not that many, but it's all
So
definition.
it's not like relate this graph to like what happened on this graph. So
Yeah.
it's literally all definition.
Right.
So if we like go over that Quizlet, we should be like set.
I think so. Yeah.